It's so nice to be back here. I'm Vivian Schiller. I'm Vice President and Executive Director of Aspen Digital, obviously a program of the Aspen Institute. I've been on the stage many times, and it's always just an event that I absolutely love. And of course, a huge thank you to Bob and Soledad Hurst. This is the Hurst series, after all, and we're so grateful that we can share amazing people like this woman I'm about to introduce momentarily with all of you in the Aspen community. So there is a lot to talk about. I mean, the New York Times, wow, we could easily just, what time is it? We could be here. Everybody, can you cancel your plans for the weekend? We're just going to go right through. So anyway.
Skip all that art seeing, right?
Yeah. Let's keep going. Meredith Kopit Levien, President and CEO of the New York Times Company. She has been...
Thank you.
I think there's a few New York Times subscribers and fans in here.
Always delights me.
Yes.
Can't get enough of that.
So I have been joyfully, I should say, for full disclosure, I was at the New York Times for 7 years. We did not overlap. Sadly, I would have loved to have been at the New York Times. We would have had fun. But Meredith has sort of, grown into the role and the badass woman that she is today. She was the COO of the New York Times. Before that, she was the Chief Revenue Officer. Before that, she was at Forbes, The Atlantic. And crucially, she was a Henry Crown Fellow, so she's very at home here in Aspen. Okay.
Can I also give my fun? How long has the Ideas Festival been going on? 20 years? 21 years. So 21 years ago, I sat out there and folded shirts for the first festival when I was at The Atlantic. And I literally was like, this is the best thing, not the shirt folding part, the actual festival. Yeah. This is the best thing I've ever done in my life. And I must have come 3 or 4 times to The Atlantic, and then I left The Atlantic. Great. But I have so much affection for the Institute, for Aspen, for everything I've gotten to do here.
Well, look at you now. Okay, we're going to start. Now, I will say I am a recovering journalist, so I know how to throw out hardball questions. So forgive me. We will get to some tougher questions, and I'm sure you will have some tougher questions. Not that I'm worried Meredith can't handle them. But we're going to start with a softball. I just want to say it up front. So tell us what it's like to be so fabulous. I've already done it, and I'm not going to reveal.
I haven't done it yet.
No, in all, but it's both a softball, but it's also a very serious question, which is, how is it that the New York Times is succeeding when we look around, and we're going to talk more about this later, when we look at the news media landscape and so many are failing?
Yeah, let me, again, thanks for having me here. Let me just first say what has happened to the rest of the media landscape, and particularly to newspaper journalism, is devastating for the country, for the world, for our sense of a shared fact base. I just said this to somebody walking in. I think the latest statistic is that 75% of the news journalists in this country, I assume this came from newspapers, have lost their jobs in the last 20 years. So this is a profoundly bad situation. And we should all care about it. And it's why we do things like this, because we want to be out talking about the importance of journalism. If I had to boil down whatever success the Times has achieved through its digital transformation to the shortest possible thing I could say, it's 2 words: value and values. On value, I will say, hands down, the most important thing the New York Times did, through all the years of going from being a very profitable print newspaper to then many difficult years to where we are now, was we kept investing in the journalism. If I could literally, I could stop the story there. I've been there 12 years. The thing I'm proudest of and most obsessed with is we have many hundreds more journalists working in the New York Times news operation, also in other places, but just in that core newsroom than when I started. And so that's the biggest reason. And in terms of just giving value to our readers and to the general public, we are doing more journalism in more formats from more places and countries and topics. And we have also really widened what to use a business jargony term, the value proposition of the New York Times. We have games that tens of millions of people play in some cases every single day. Raise your hand if you play with Yay! So keep playing. It's a huge part of our business. So we have these. It's important. Brings lots of people to us. We have 550 journalists and counting in the athletics newsroom who are just covering sports. So that's got to be America, if not the world's largest sports newsroom, and a modern day Consumer Reports and Wirecutter, and this incredible recipe site. So we've really widened the value proposition. And with that, we've kind of stuck to our immutables, which are the values of the place, the independence of the journalism, and the sort of rigor and quality standard, and even the craft that goes into the combination of kind of coverage and a digital product experience. So we've stuck to those two things, value and values. And if you'll humor me to say one more kind of straightforwardly commercial thing, we've had these two principles about the New York Times business that really kind of seem that they're at odds, and we've just refused to let them be the whole way through. One is that we have to make coverage and products that are so good that you will come to us directly and ultimately pay for them. And we have, we're closing in on 12 million subscribers. I think that makes us the largest paid journalism site on Earth, and that's great. But we also have to have the widest possible audience of everybody else for our work, because that's where the next, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million subscribers will come from. And very importantly, that's also how the journalism has impact, and that's really why the place exists. So we've had to do both those things. We have to calibrate always between how do we have enough that you'll pay, but also so much out there that many people will be exposed.
You talk about this like it's so obvious, and of course we did this, and then all of a sudden the money just came, but that's not the case. I mean, I want to give you a little more credit for this, because when I was in the mid-aughts, was running nytimes.com, and there was a moment in there when it was kind of like really the advertising was declining, and then all of a sudden there was a really big drop. And I remember we had internal, I can say it now, but the statute of limitations has run out. But we were in these high-level executive meetings, the whole leadership of the New York Times, and we were like, the question is it cyclical or is it secular? Is it cyclical? By the way, I didn't know that meaning of the word secular at the time, but I quickly learned it. And it was like, it must be cyclical.
I could give you another way to call that, but it would require some profanity.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's appropriate.
I think
Are we effed? Or
yeah, exactly.
Is this just a moment?
But,
right.
The thing is, looking back now, reader, it was secular.
Yeah,
so
structural.
Structural, thank you.
Wholesale market evolution.
Exactly. Yeah. So to come back from that and change the entire foundational business model that sustained the New York Times for so long, which was print subscriptions and display advertising in the newspaper.
And print advertising.
And print
which
advertising.
Was like falling like a knife
and
to
classified.
Butter even when
yeah.
we got there. Yeah.
So it's really, really a triumph. All right. So let's. I want to just sort of widen the lens here and for a minute and place the New York Times in sort of the broader environment that we're living in. So I think there's. No matter what your political persuasion, I think we can all agree there is something of an assault on evidence-based reality today. Yeah. Maybe not everybody agrees with that. I feel that it's true. At the heart of evidence-based truth-telling is journalism, and arguably not for all. I'm on the board of The Guardian, so I have to give a props to The Guardian as well. But at the heart,
Guardian,
thank you!
The Guardian is doing, from what I can tell, so well.
It is doing well.
Journalism. Yeah.
But putting The Guardian aside just for a moment, for many, the heart of journalism is the New York Times. So, we have gone from the assault on truth to the New York Times sort of standing up, and we're going to get to bias in a second, so let's not go there for a second. But how are you thinking? I promise we're going to get there. But how are you thinking about approaching this moment when just, expertise, authority, knowledge, all of that kind of thing are discounted?
Yeah, I want to say one thing about your very last comment. You used the word triumph, and I want to tell you there is no person associated with the New York Times who thinks we have triumphed at anything. The journalism is an everyday pursuit. It is the
business model's a triumph.
And even the business model, I want to tell you, the landscape is changing again. We're going to talk about that very profoundly. And every inch of whatever the New York Times and journalism writ large has sort of earned to success is going to have to be re-earned every day by being relevant to people and important in their lives. So I just want to say that on the question of like assault on evidence-based reality, I think that's the core of your question. We often say at the Times, the answer to all questions at the New York Times is just do more reporting. And that's my sort of short answer to that question. I think we are all living in an ecosystem where there is an abundance of takes and there is less and less and less original reporting. And that means most people in their media diets are just not spending the time that they used to or running in at all to evidence-based reality, which is, quality, original, independent journalism that is grounded in reporting. And I want to say all the other things they're doing in their media diets, YouTube, podcasts, Instagram, TikTok, that has purpose. It's just a different purpose than independent journalism reporting. So what are we doing about it? We are hiring more reporters. We are putting those reporters even more places. We are having those reporters work in many more formats, including on video in a much bigger way than we ever have. And we are putting that reporting out into the world where people are going to find it. To the point I was making earlier, we've got to have a lot of stuff out there where people are so they see our evidence-based, reporting. They see our reporting too. And all of that is incredibly important. And I'll give you one more bit, which is we are doing more and more to sort of show the work. We can't just assume anymore that people trust the New York Times or that they think our work is fair or even valuable and relevant to them. So whenever we can, we are not just putting the reporting out, we are exposing you to the reporter and how that story came to be and how that reporting happened. We published a story, I want to say 10 or 11 days ago, on very significant flaws in the organ transplant and organ donor systems, like a shocking story. The guy who did it, investigative reporter named Brian Rosenthal, amazing, young, incredible reporter. What did he publishes this many thousands of word story, and then he makes a visit to the Daily where he explains the story, but he also explains the year and a half of reporting he did. How did that story come to be? And then we shoot like a 2-minute video with Brian describing to you how he got the reporting. And in that video, you literally see text messages from people in the system to expose the flaws to the system. So that is our answer to the assault on reality. More reporting.
Right. More reporting and sort of showing your work.
And I'll just say, what do I want people to know? We had 50 people on the ground in Ukraine over the last year. We have dozens in the Middle East. We have been covering a brutal, horrific civil war in Sudan that most of the world wouldn't even know happened were it not for the reporting from the New York Times, a small number of other places. And that's like the core of what we do, and that is expensive, and it is resource intensive, and we
dangerous.
Have a lot, and dangerous. People do it at their, at real peril, but it's like dangerous for society not to have that level of exposure to reporting, not just Times reporting, to all quality independent reporting.
Okay, so all of that reporting exposes the New York Times. This is not a new phenomenon. I think it goes back to the very founding of the New York Times, to a lot of criticism. Meredith and I were... I know, shocker. Meredith and I were bonding backstage over our mutual detest of the expression that some people use, neither of us, that if both sides are mad at you, you must be doing something right. That's not a good expression, because if both sides are mad at you, you could possibly be doing everything wrong. It's not really a benchmark.
Yeah.
That said, social media feeds, and I'm sure your cocktail parties and all your conversations are filled with complaints about New York Times bias.
Yeah.
It's and from both sides. I don't mean that in a way to sort of let you off the hook.
Yeah.
But there are some very, whether it's about Trump, Israel, Gaza. This is active. Right. We can talk about the last 48 hours in terms of a controversy that's blown up. gender-affirming care, your decision not to endorse a candidate for the mayor, criticism about the New York Times. I'm just
We
repeating.
might be here all weekend.
I know. Yeah, I'll just keep going. And it's like the joke about it's like going to be like a CVS receipt with all the all of the approaches. So
Yeah.
Go.
What's so mean?
Sorry. Before you speak, I just want to say one thing so everybody knows.
I'm not the editor.
You're not the editor.
It doesn't work for me.
Thank you.
Yeah. The newsroom at part of why the New York Times is so great is I work for a publisher and a board. The editor also works for the publisher. I have nothing to do. I don't tell the journalists what to do and what not to do. And that's, our job is to pursue the truth. The job of the journalist is pursue the truth wherever it may lead, even when that is to uncomfortable places. And I'm going to say, even when that is not, in service to our own commercial interests. That's why that separation exists. Pursue the truth wherever it may lead. Cover the world fully and fairly as it is, not as people wish it to be. Our job is not to advocate. There are other places that do that. That is not what we do. That is not the purpose of the New York Times. That's the most important thing I can say. And the work of report. It all comes back to reporting. What is reporting at its best from the New York Times? You have journalists who are trained in a rigorous process. They are going out into the field to cover their subjects with a posture of searching and inquiry, not one of knowing. They've got an open mind. We say they've got a blank notebook. And there is a process. Journalism in this way is a little bit like medicine. It's done by human beings. So, of course, humans are flawed. Humans have biases. But there is an enormous amount of process in place to reduce that as much as possible so that the work can be as fair as possible. What does that look like? It looks like a really high set of standards for how we source and verify facts. It looks like when we're writing about subjects, we are actually, as often as we can, we are going out and talking to those subjects. When we are writing about someone accused of wrongdoing, we do our best to give them a chance to comment on that. We have a set of standards around ethics and how to minimize potential conflicts of interest in the work. One of the things people don't know about the Times, and this is true for most, I'm sure it's true at The Guardian too, most kind of newspaper-based companies, we have an enormous amount of editing, expert editing. So every story at the Times is edited by experts, and big stories, sensitive stories on the topics, all the topics you just referenced, they get multiple edits by multiple expert people. So an enormous amount of sort of process and rigor that goes into the work. And I have to say, how do I think about the standard for kind of fairness? I think if you only read the New York Times, and most people have a varied media diet, but if you only read the New York Times, would you be getting a full depiction of what is happening in this issue area? And I think on all those topics you referenced that we are achieving that bar.
But the broader environment in which the New York Times exists has changed.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of outrage.
There's a lot of outrage, and there is a searching and a yearning for many, and it's completely understandable for someone to sort of, for news organizations to manifest, my or your particular anger around an issue, not with lies, with truth. And I think I think that's some of the frustration. And some of the issues are around, and we can go into the details of how headlines are. Sometimes the headlines sort of fall short and change.
Yeah. Let me say, it's just not our work. The work is not, again, it's not to advocate. And in some instances where people are very upset with us, in some instances it's about a headline or a piece of how we, a quote, a piece of how we covered a subject, and often that gets amplified by social media, which is kind of the opposite of independent journalism. It has a role to play, but in this instance, social media is affirming your preconceived worldviews, so that tends to spiral into something bigger. What I will say is the Times does the best it can to correct its errors when we make them. One. Two, we listen to our critics, but those critics will not stop us. The sort of outrage will not stop us from covering the world fully and fairly and as our reporters see it.
You say that these stories are amplified. They're also weaponized. So just the example from the last 48 hours, just super briefly, there was a very powerful image on the New York Times, stop me if I've gotten this wrong, of a boy who was clearly malnourished and starving in Gaza. It then turned out, with some additional reporting, and the New York Times it wasn't a correction, it was an editor's note, which I know that sounds very arcane, but there's a difference, saying this boy actually had a pre-existing medical condition. So all of that, I mean, I'll just say as far as I'm concerned, this is all just normal acts of reporting and elaborating, all that kind of thing. But you would have thought, I mean, on both sides, that for those who, I don't even want to say on the right and the left, because it's all mixed up when it comes to Israel, but those who don't want, I'm being so careful about how I say this. Those who were not looking for ammunition, those who didn't want amplification of any kind of malnutrition or purposeful starving, their position in Gaza said this is clearly an example of the New York Times manipulating the facts, and it was the opposite on the other side. And it was a big reaction. You got vandalized.
We get there are many things we get big reactions to. I think I've sort of answered to the I told you about the process and the set of standards, and in the instance of this particular photograph, I think our reporting has shown it is inarguable that there is starvation happening, that the sort of point of the broader story held, and to your point, actually an editor's note is a meaningful thing to issue, to say something has changed here, we've reported further, we have more information, and in fact this boy did have a pre-existing condition. It does not change the fact that malnourishment was also there.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to zoom out even further and just talk about the broader news media, which I appreciated that you talked about that at the top. So many other, and I'm going to divide the world into sort of like fact-based good faith news organizations and sort of media. So let's just focus on fact-based good faith media. In many cases, it's collapsing. National news organizations are, I'll say the worst case, troubled, like the Washington Post. Wall Street Journal's doing pretty great. Guardian's doing pretty great. You look at the local news, and like you said, it's devastating.
Devastating.
So how do you think about your responsibility and role there?
Yeah, look, I think all that is contributing to the kind of trust crisis. I believe we have a trust crisis in this country, and all the research tells us that trust in institutions is very low, maybe at an all-time low. That is also true for media, by the way. Trust in individuals is also low, so I think we are at a point where kind of we trust one another less as a society. And I think there are two contributing factors to that. We've touched on both of them. One is this idea that people's media diets now do have social media and other things that are fed to them by algorithms that are affirming of existing sort of tastes and proclivities and worldviews. I'm going to say again and again, that has a purpose, but it is a different purpose than having a shared fact base for society, and it tends to be tribalizing, polarizing, it can harden views. And the second thing, I want to talk about what it means that people don't see local newspapers anymore or get what they used to get from local newspapers, or young people are growing up in houses where there just is no local newspapers. What local newspapers did was they affirmed our common interest. They affirmed that, we may have different political views, but if we're neighbors, we care about the schools and the grocery stores. And by the way, we run into the same journalists in the bagel shop or at the ball field. And so the whole thing was understood at the level of people's daily lives to be necessary and valuable. and underpinned this idea of common interest. And I think we've lost that. So what are we kind of doing about that? I'll say a few things. For our own ability to show people that our work is fair and at least trustworthy. I can't make people trust us, but we can show that we're trustworthy. We are putting the journalism in more places. We were not on TikTok, probably 4 years ago, and we are really there in a big way now, and same with YouTube and same with Instagram. We are really working in more formats. When a journalist, Jodi Kantor, who I'm sure many of you know her work, she's covering the Supreme Court now. She did this incredible piece on how powerful Amy Coney Barrett is and why, and sort of her positions. And the story was quite long, quite well, just incredibly well reported. And in addition, we did like a 2-minute video of Jodi sort of explaining her, explaining her decisions, explaining her power. And it was just like, you might not ever read the story, but you're getting this high-quality reported journalism from one of the masters of it. So we're in different formats. And then I'm going to say something else. We are working really hard to show up in many millions of people's lives in other ways that are important to them too, right? If you come to us for your diversion with our games, or, I'm like a pretty sad Jets fan, and pretty sad. But, I go to the Athletic to understand, do they have a chance? What will happen in that home opener versus Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers? We are showing up. We help people decide what to make for dinner, and they can trust that those recipes are good, or, which vitamin C cream to buy from Wirecutter. And we really do have a thesis and some evidence to support it that if we show up in other ways in your life that you trust, you're just more likely to run into our journalism, and that is sort of net good for trust. The last thing I'm going to say, I said this to somebody as just before I walked in, the Times also is, we are not going to meet every journalism need. We are very worried about the local news ecosystem, and we have funded a fellowship program run by our former executive editor, who's an extraordinary figure in journalism, where Dean Baquet, where we are. There's no commercial value to us. This is like for society. We are training fellows in investigative and enterprise reporting, like big deal accountability journalism stories at a local level in places like Jackson, Mississippi, and Baltimore, and I could name a bunch of others where the papers aren't there anymore, or there are these upstart places. In the case of Baltimore, we worked with a digital upstart called the Baltimore Banner, and we actually they're doing an unbelievable job. And the Baltimore Banner, with support from the New York Times, won a Pulitzer. Together, we won a Pulitzer this year for a story on the opioid crisis. So we are really focused on how do we help more people have more exposure to good reporting, and we think that that is the answer to the trust crisis.
And I want to pivot to sort of what is the next big, possibly already appearing to be monumental.
I know, we've made it like 25 minutes.
Shift.
We haven't said AI yet.
I know. Yeah. We're going to talk about AI.
Here it is.
Okay, here it is. No, we got to talk about AI because it is a very, very big deal. So the New York Times is taking a different approach than I think a lot of other news organizations. And this sounds more cynical than I intended to, but you're playing it at both ends. You both have a significant, and I'll ask you to talk about where that stands, lawsuit against OpenAI for the fact that OpenAI has been scraping New York Times
and Microsoft.
And Microsoft. But you've also just done a very large deal with Amazon. So just talk about a little bit about your approach. And then
and I'd love, whenever I talk about AI, I also want to talk about innovation and what we think AI can do for the place. I want to push a little on that premise of we're kind of playing both sides and say we have a really deliberate strategy and approach for sustaining high-quality independent journalism from the New York Times and in the world. We see this as kind of important to the industry and frankly to all people who are making intellectual property. So sort of it all hangs from one approach. I don't think I can talk about what we've done with Amazon, our lawsuit, without first saying we think that journalism at its best is it's sort of like first, best, most a human endeavor. Think about expert reporters going to the front lines of war zones and where fires have just destroyed people's homes, or just walking the halls of Congress, and what are they there to do? They are there to bear witness, and with expertise and with judgment to translate that for people into understanding. And we think that that human endeavor is like the core of how society understands itself, and is always going to be really important. So I can't talk about AI without saying that. On sort of a positive, optimistic note, I think AI has the potential to be a real force multiplier to the 3,000 people making journalism and other kinds of content at the New York Times.
How so? Describe.
We used AI when we used AI to help us comb through volumes of public records about Trump's cabinet appointees before they went through their confirmation hearings. That is one example. That is how we use AI. It's like an augmenter to what humans can do. We can use AI to make our work more accessible to people. So you can now, I'm a runner, and I listen to a lot of the Times text articles in automated voice. And by the way, that automated voice has gotten much better. Over time. It's fewer mispronunciations. It's much better, and so on. So we see a lot of potential for this, assuming there is an ecosystem where our work is not being misappropriated by the big tech companies, by the LLM makers. So let me talk about that. The large language model makers are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on compute, on power, energy, on talent, and we think that makes clear they are in a position to, and could and should, be paying for the copyrighted works that underpin the data that makes their models work. So that's sort of the basic idea here, and most important thing to say. And I want to say this is a profound issue for news and for journalism, and therefore for the American public, but it is an issue for people making all kinds of intellectual property, software and movies, and all
music,
of it. Music, all of it. So this really matters to everybody. And we believe the law, the copyright law, is on our side here. And your initial question, we are taking the approach of enforcing our rights in court, and also we are open and willing to work with companies where there is fair value exchange in a sustainable way, and where we ultimately have sort of permission and control over our work. And I would regard sort of all of that as one kind of collective approach to see that we can keep doing what we do.
Where does I know you can't go into detail about the lawsuit, but where does it stand?
Yeah, listen, we're really confident about the facts of our case. We certainly believe the law is on our side here. A lot has happened. There were 2 district court rulings that happened pretty recently in a case against Anthropic and a case against Meta. And I would say those, what happened in those instances sort of affirmed our position that you can't steal our stuff and use it to compete. You can't take copyright works and use it to compete. In the Microsoft ruling in particular, the judge went to some length to actually say he believed that the sort of theft of copyrighted works, or the use without permission, would be deemed in many instances illegal, that there would have to be payment for the use, and he wrote, just that essentially everything, we saw him say sort of supported our view on this. And I think you and I talked a little bit in advance that the
AI action.
White House has released an AI action plan, and I would say there's plenty in that plan we agree with. We agree that there needs to be investment in AI. We think it's really important for innovation in America. We agree that there's actually a component of the AI action plan that gets at how important high-quality data sets are to the advancement of AI, and obviously we agree with that. So there's plenty in the plan to agree with. I would say the president made some comments afterwards suggesting, concerns over the model makers having to pay to license content, and I've already given you my position.
Yeah, to be clear, there was nothing in the AI action plan that addressed intellectual property pretty much at all.
Yeah.
But the president at the press conference said that he is concerned that if there is any kind of I'm paraphrasing, sort of friction for the AI companies to be able to scoop up all the data that they want, that they will not be able to grow, which of course is problematic.
I go back to they're paying for compute, they're paying for talent,
exactly.
They're paying for energy.
But where is, sorry, I keep pressing on this issue, but what's the timing on this lawsuit? When do we think it's going to?
I've sort of, you can go online.
Okay.
I do tell people, read the complaint.
Okay.
There's a lot in there.
So one of the other issues, before we leave the subject of AI, one of the concerns, and I suspect you're going to tell me this is why you have invested so much into direct relationships, but I'm sure all of you that use Google or any other search engine, you can now get a lot of the things that would previously send you to a news organization to get an answer. You get the AI summary, and the AI summaries, of course, is extracted from information that they pull from the news from publishers. Not necessarily with attribution. How big a concern is that for you?
Yeah, listen, I have talked publicly for a long time now about the idea, and you know this from The Guardian, that the big tech platforms, generally the big tech companies, are sending less and less traffic to publishers. So I've been saying that for a while, and as AI tools return answers, kind of full answers to questions and not links, that's part of that. I think the Times is in a unique position to kind of contend with that because we've worked so hard for so long. It is our strategy to build as many direct relationships with people as we can, to have these products that people kind of seek out, ask for by name, come to directly. So I think we are in a good place to contend with that. But, I think it is absolutely incumbent on these big tech companies to ensure that, there's an ecosystem. They control a lot of the flow of information and how people discover information, and it's incumbent on them to ensure that high-quality content can be surfaced in that ecosystem and that there are compensation models for it. And by the way, we've seen that, right? We've done a deal. We've seen other deals. And if that doesn't happen, what I'll say is there will be less and less high-quality journalism and other kinds of creative content.
And then those AI summaries will become worse and worse as well. So we're going to come to your questions momentarily. I just want to ask you one last question before we open it up, which is the New York Times must be, if not one of the most covered, reported on media organizations on earth. There are countless. Sorry to say that I read all of them. Blogs and different newsletters and things of media covering media. So we
media on media.
Media on media. It's a whole subculture. So what is it? So what do we not? What is everybody in here? Let's just assume we all read all that coverage. What do we not know about the New York Times that you think we should know?
That's a great question, and we spend a fair amount of time thinking about what do we want people to know that they don't know, and how do we help them know that? And probably, I think I've given you a lot of answers to questions that would support what I'm about to say, but I want people to know the lengths that our journalists go to be fair, to be full in their work. I want people to know how much time goes into that. I want people to know how much that costs, how much support and security and editing and care and that takes to do it, and just like how much it matters to society. I'll give you two examples that, like, for me, just kind of show it all. Who listens to The Daily here? Oh, yay, keep listening, thank you. So we have 2 new hosts on The Daily. One of them is an incredible reporter named Natalie Kitroeff. Natalie was the Mexico bureau chief. And Natalie, so she's done a ton of reporting work directly, a lot of it in Mexico. And Natalie actually reported to help people understand the sort of some of the origins of the fentanyl crisis. She reported, like, basically from inside a fentanyl lab as part of a cartel. And that reporting just exposed how kind of common and easy the making of fentanyl could be. You can imagine the sort of danger of that reporting, but, like, that's an important thing for people to know. This is a drug that can, like, be made in a kitchen with things that can be kept in a kitchen. So that is an example of, like, the lengths that reporters will go to, Times reporters and the reporters at all the other quality news organizations, to see that the public has understanding on important stuff. I really want more people to know that. And then just, like, the time, I still think a lot about that Harvey Weinstein story and the sort of way that just, like, changed the world forever. And the whole body of work around Me Too, but particularly that story. That story took months and months and months to be reported, and to be reported in a way where it could stand, right? And people could take it in as real and true and trustworthy. And then obviously that and other pieces around the same time had just an enormous impact on the world. So I want people to know that. And I want people to know how much else there is there. We have this expression we say all the time, inside the Times. We want to mean more to more people. And, really, what else can you imagine doing? In my house, I say my 14-year-old, my 24-year-old niece, my 54-year-old self, and my 84-year-old mother, we all play the same New York Times games. And we all talk about them, and we all care what the words are. And, we had, like, I want to say, like, 75 people in The Athletic just covering the NFL last year, just covering the NFL. So, like, if you love an NFL team, we probably have one of the best reporters, covering that NFL team. So I want people to know that. And I'll close, with a fun one. I drink less than I used to, and I lift weights. And we were bonding over HRT. I take HRT because of reporting in the science-backed, like, health and wellness coverage in the New York Times. That was so big and so important and, like, so trustworthy that, like, my own habits and the habits of
so you learned that from the New York Times.
Other people have changed. And I guess I would, like, tie all that in a bow of reporting is really important. We're not going to have a shared fact base without it as a country. Getting people to spend more time on deeply reported work that is held to a set of standards for truth and accuracy, it really matters to the country, and it's how the country understands itself and gets better.
Thank you. I do have some. I was going to say, I do need to talk to you about getting connected to the editor of Connections, because that purple
she
row,
is awesome.
That purple row, sometimes I'm like, come on.
Sometimes I get the purple first.
I know.
She is awesome.
Okay. All right, we're going to your questions. Okay. I don't know where the microphones are. Where are the microphones? Okay, here you are. Okay. No, we got to do the mics. There we go. Right here. And if you feel comfortable, please say your name.
My name's Rachel. I'm already not comfortable.
Oh. You're in a safe space, Rachel.
Notwithstanding that the New York Times is outstanding and everything you've said is a great defense in challenging times. But we're living in particularly challenging times right now.
I agree with that.
And, well, just sort of to cut to the topic, how do you get rid of the daylight between the podcasters that are the Midas brothers and the sane-washing accusations upon the integrity with which I think you are working, notwithstanding, of course, that these podcasters get a lot of their information from you.
I love that question. And what I want to say, like those giant podcasts, by the way, The Daily was the largest podcast on Apple last year. So we have big podcasts too. But, Rogan, Theo Von, like there's so many of them. I think they do an important thing. They play a role. It's not the same role we're playing, right? It's, if a subject, Newsom goes on The Daily, like there are follow-up questions. One is not better or worse. They're just, I think we're doing different things. And I do think a lot of the take ecosystem in some way, just like television was kind of derivative in its own way of newspaper reporting, and you're getting at that, Rachel, in your question, a lot of the take ecosystem still relies on the reporting of places like The Times to sort of have stuff to talk about. The shortest answer I'll give is we have to be where the people are finding those places. And even if it's like hard for the business model, and even if it means, that's why I said we don't, we have not triumphed. We are in an always on, phase of trying to reimagine this business model. We've got to be on YouTube. We've got to be in these places where people are, TikTok, Instagram, with our stuff. And if we're not there and we're not in the formats where people are taking it in, we're sort of ceding the ground that independent journalism has to play a much bigger role in. So that's... Say one more beat about what you mean by that, because I hear that in lots of different
briefly, because we want to get on to other questions too.
Just the fact that if you contrast those two information delivery ways, it would be arguable that the truth of what is going on and the way Donald Trump himself is being presented by the Midas brothers, there's huge amount of space between what seems to me to be the necessity to present the president in a presidential way, which inherently normalizes and sane-washes
normalization.
These other podcasters aren't.
I'm going to more reporting and getting more people exposed to our reporting.
You can't control the rest of the information ecosystem.
But we can do more reporting and get more people to come to it.
Is there a mic? We have some questions down here. Is there a mic here? Thank you. Just down here, right here, in the white. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. I'm Karen. I work at the high school here in Aspen.
So
we
lucky.
have a great journalism program and a lot of aspiring journalists. So are the skills changing that these kids need to be better journalists going forward in the future, given the changes in your industry? Is it enough to just be curious and good writers? Do they also need to be videographers? And
That's great question. I would say the core skill is curiosity, open-mindedness, independent thought, originality of, why, and like caring about the world. Those do not change. I think the formats that people work in are evolving. By the way, text is not going away. Like we tout all the time how our audience is engaged with the Times. They're engaged with all of it, the video and the audio. They're also still reading. They're still reading lots and lots of stories. So I would say to any budding journalist today, the thing you've got to be great at is, can you do the reporting thing I just described? And that is a real skill, and you're probably going to have to do it in a lot of different formats.
Yeah, great. Okay, just a question right here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Bill. I want to ask Vivian a question. I think your questions have been incredibly insightful tonight.
Oh, thank you.
And you may remember that the Congress rescinded $500 million a year from public broadcasting.
Yeah.
That's about $10 million a state per year, which means a whole lot of journalists are at risk because of that.
Yeah.
That money, about a third of the budget of National Public Radio, which I remember you once led, will go away. It's been there since it was founded, but it's not going to be there after this year. what's your, by the way, the Daily is also bought by those stations. Without that purchasing power, what do you think the impact is going to be of that rescission?
Oh boy. Okay. I really want the attention to be on Meredith. I'm sorry.
It's a really important question.
I was the CEO of NPR a little over 10 years, and I should mention that Breeze Richardson, the head of Aspen Public Radio, I think I see you over here, is in the room. It's going to have a profound impact, particularly on stations in smaller communities. I think the larger communities, they get a very, very small percentage of their revenue from the federal government. I think they will be fine, but the impact across the system, particularly in stations that really, for whom that federal funding is a lifeline, is profound. There is many of us, myself included, are actively involved in different working on different models to at least first as a stopgap for that funding, and then sort of as a long-term strategy to try to replace those funding and maintain the critical public service mission of those stations. So,
and a lot of them in rural places where that's the journalism.
Yeah, that's the journalism. All right, let's come back to the New York Times. Yes, right here.
That was a good question.
Yeah, thank you though for that. I appreciate
Matt Cunningham. I'm a resident here in town. First, I have a beef because I have books piling up because every morning the first thing I do is open up the Times, no matter what time I wake up. So
how dare you, Meredith?
That and I don't have enough charge on my battery by the time I get through reading in the morning. But to the point, I serve on some other nonprofit boards. When we look at how to reach people, there is a diametric difference between an age group above, you can say it's 50 or 60, they want print. Below that, everybody, including my kids, want this. When you get to the phone, we'll call it, you have this issue where Joe Rogan, for example, has 60 million followers, including a lot of younger folks that I know.
Yeah.
So to me, the question is, how do you, and you've talked a little bit about it, but how do you break through to be a meaningful, whatever word, media source or knowledge source when you can talk about podcasters, and I think that will wane with time because there's so much of it. But ultimately, how do you break through with someone who has, and I'm not making a judgment on him, but 60 million.
Totally. We have to be in the places where people are and where they're getting their news. And I'll just tell you, the Ezra Klein show, our news show with Ross Douthat called Interesting Times. We just launched a culture show with Wesley Morris. It's amazing, called Cannonball. Those are all now YouTube shows. So those are all, you can go watch them on YouTube the way you can watch Rogan, and more to come. We have had a huge increase in the amount of video we're doing on the Times, both off platforms, so on Instagram, on TikTok, anywhere you might find video, and also on the Times. So some of that battery life and some of that scrolling that's taking you away from books is, we're doing so much more news video, reporter on camera video, but also just news video, like what's happening. We're going to take you there. We're going to show it to you now. In our lifestyle products, much more video. So like watching someone make a recipe. We've got highlights, we had NBA highlights. We had the NHL final highlights on The Athletic. So just much, much more video being in those formats. And I'll just say to you, we are obsessed with growing the engaged audience for the New York Times. We've already got, it's not, I never think it's big enough, but I'll say, I think I said this at the beginning, 50 to 100 million people every week to our sites and apps. We have millions of people who listen to our podcast every day, every week. We have the internet's, I don't know if I said this, largest newsletter, largest newsletter, journalistic editorial newsletter. I think something like 17 million people. It's a free newsletter. Get the morning and Many, many millions open it every single day. So we are working on making sure we've got these wide, free products that lots and lots of people can engage with.
Do you think that can break through? That's the question.
I do. I
mean,
and I want to
it
say
has
it's
been.
why I said, and by the way, breaking through to people in all generations. And it's why I said to Vivian, like, no triumph, like we're, and that, by the way, information ecosystem is going to keep changing. We're going to have to keep figuring out the next way to break through.
Great. Question, yeah, all the way in the back. I see somebody. Sorry. Just going to get you your exercise. Oh, sure. Okay, sorry.
Could you address ownership in media? I dropped my
good one.
I dropped my subscription to the Washington Post when it looked like Bezos was interfering with the editorial department. I think everybody doesn't have any faith in CBS anymore since the courts have ordered that they give $30 million or something of beneficial publicity to Trump's campaign. I really have to kind of pick and choose through the newspapers. I love The Guardian. I don't know where the New York Times is particularly standing, but I feel like I've got to research who's owning these people and how is that influencing the news.
I love that question. I'm so glad it was asked. I would have felt, 2 hours from now that I'm bummed.
I should have asked it. Darn it.
That's a great question. The New York Times is a public company. I'm the CEO of a public company, but we are a family-controlled public company. We've been controlled by the Ox-Sulzberger family for more than a century. And unlike other controlled companies, the control structure at the New York Times exists for the purpose of keeping the journalism independent of anyone's interest, even our own commercial interest. I cannot say that enough times. It exists so that we deliver on our mission to society, which is to seek the truth and help people understand the world. And our business is the business of journalism. And I would even say games and recipes and sports journalism and shopping advice, that's all part of it. It's done to a level of craft and rigor and standard that keeps with the New York Times journalistic standard. The most important thing we do at the New York Times is deliver on that mission of high-quality news journalism. It's like the reason for being of the place, and we are not another business. We have no other interests but serving the public's interest. And that's literally, that goes up to the ownership structure of the Times and why the control structure exists. Yeah. And I think it's really important. We've got, our only job is really great journalism.
But it's an excellent question to look at ownership. Just one correction, it wasn't the courts that required CBS to pay. So it was...
and I'm going to say one more thing, because if I had an investor in the room, they might say, but what does that do to the value of the company? That's a good question. And what I would say is the most value-creating thing we do at the New York Times is economically is high-quality, independent journalism. It gives the place all of its authority. It gives the place gobs of audience and engagement. It's sort of the sun in the solar system of the New York Times. It's sort of it's the life force, and that is why that ownership structure exists.
And in fact, the publisher is also the chair of the board.
Publisher is the chair of the board.
It's a funny structure at the New York Times. I always explain this to people. It's sort of like the editor-in-chief and the CEO report to the editor-in-chief reports to the publisher. The publisher, in theory, reports to the CEO, who reports to the chair, who is the same person as the publisher.
Just the publisher is the chairman.
Yeah.
The board has independent directors and family directors. It is a family-controlled public company, and the control structure exists to keep everybody's interest out of the journalism other than the public's interest.
Yeah, and I've never seen it any other way. We are out of time. Thank you so much, Meredith.
Thank you so much to
everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. So much fun.
Thank you. Wonderful.